things around us, including ourselves. Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, he says, morality means more reality. It's one of his aphorisms, his contentions. He says, morality means more reality. The goal of morality is for us to to be able to identify what's actually good and what's actually harmful, what is actually virtuous and what is actually corrupt, what is good, what is evil. To do that, we have to understand the nature of things. We have to understand what makes something good, what makes something evil, what makes something valuable, what makes something useless. That ability to distinguish is one of the goals of morality, of studying morality. And wisdom traditionally was understood to be knowledge of the rightful places of things. That's how typically scholars of the past would define wisdom. This is a very important definition. The knowledge of the rightful places of things. And it's a little ambiguous on purpose because it's meant to be applicable across the various aspects of your life. To know what the rightful place of something is. That includes physical things. What's the rightful place of, for example, when I'm entering the masjid, what's the rightful place of my foot? It would seem relatively, insignificant, trivial to us. If I'm entering the masjid, just enter with whatever foot you want as long as you enter the masjid. Our Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he taught us, you enter with the right foot. I mean, that seems arbitrary. But that's part of what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to teach us. He came to teach us what the rightful places of things are. The same is to be said about ideas and words. What are the rightful words to be spoken right now? So a child comes to me and the child's really upset about something. Do I lash out? Do I sternly scold them? Do I try to correct them right away? Wisdom would demand that I try to first calm them down, understand what's going on with them. So we use the word wisdom a lot. We'll say this is a very wise person, wisdom, but it's not always clear what we mean by that. When a person manifests wisdom, that would look like what's called justice. Justice is to put things in their rightful place. وَضْعُ الشَّيْء فِي مَحَلِّهِ. And hikmah, wisdom, is to know what the rightful places are. A person with justice in their soul will be able to put things in their rightful place. I'll give you an example, because the two are not necessarily connected. Sometimes, you know you shouldn't say something. You know that if you say something, it will really hurt someone, or it will not be received well. So you know this. You know that this is not the time to say this. This is not the right opportunity and moment to say what I really want to say. So you have wisdom about it. You know this is not the right words. These are not the right words, or this is not the right occasion. Justice, however, means you have the ability to restrain yourself and act in accordance with the wisdom that you have. Because someone could know not to say it and still say it. What would you do with such a person? Usually if someone doesn't know, we teach them, right? We say, well, you didn't know, let me explain to you what to do. What happens when they know what to do or what not to do and they still do the wrong thing? What's missing? It's not knowledge. What's missing is justice of the soul. And that is, reflected in justice in the world through our behavior. So I've given this little preamble about wisdom and justice to kind of explain, in general, at a very, you could say, broad level, what we're talking about. Why would that be so difficult? Why would it be so difficult? Today we're going to talk about, and in the, these sessions, we're going to be talking about wisdom and not justice. Why is it so difficult to develop wisdom, though? Why is it so difficult to develop an understanding of the rightful places of things? Number one, that assumes that things have rightful places. And that's also what you have what's called adab, etiquettes. Etiquettes are really just acknowledging what the rightful places of things are and trying to behave in a way that represents that. Okay, with wisdom, I want to explore how a human being develops and how they intellectually make sense of the world. So I want to start with a theory from William Perry, and he identified four main stages of development. And you can see how people walk through these stages. The first stage he calls the stage of dualism, where things in the world are black and white. And just to remind you, the reason why I'm doing this, going through these stages, is so that we can understand, wait, why is it so difficult ultimately to develop wisdom in the world that we live in today? Let alone understand the truth, but like wisdom. It's a challenge. Let's walk through the stages and see where we start to run into issues. The first stage, he calls it dualism, where a child, typically a young child, they have black and white thinking, binary thinking about the world and about life. So, an example of this would be you teach your child that you're not supposed, or don't drink Coca-Cola. Don't do this. It's not good for you. Don't drink it. The child sees this as though it's a categorical imperative, like it's a universal law. No? That same child will show up to a family function, will go up to that auntie or that uncle while they're drinking Coca-Cola and say, hey, why are you drinking this? You're not supposed to drink this. And the auntie is like confused. Like this disrespectful little child, right? And if you don't catch the child afterwards will tell you, hey, so and so, they're so bad. Say, why? They were drinking Coca-Cola. And you're like, oh, okay, that's not that bad. No, but you told me we can't drink it. For them, if it's wrong for everybody. And so what you try to tell them is that, look, no, there's nuance here, right? You say there's nuance. You're not supposed to drink it. They're an adult. They can make their own decisions. And also, you're not supposed to go tell them, don't drink it. You're not allowed to do that. So for the child, it can be very challenging. So what? Is Coca-Cola good or bad? Which one is it? And if it's bad, why was that person doing it? Parents experience this all the time. You tell your child, don't say stupid. And one day, when you're not paying attention, you turn to your spouse and you say, that was so stupid. Your child, hey, you're not supposed to say that. And you're like, you want to say it's not that bad, but then you've already told them it is bad. And you're like, you're right, we shouldn't say that. Because for them, it's black and white. That's why kids will say the darnest things we say, right? They will say the most out of pocket things. Because we kind of know the nuances a little bit, the cultural context. We're like, okay, that person, I won't say it. This person, I will say it to them. I'll point this out to that person, but not that person. And we kind of like gauge who will receive it well, who won't. How much should I say it? How should I say it? Children? Savage. Say it how it is. Because the world is black and white. And you try to tell them, you shouldn't say that. But it's true. You ever had that one? They'll judge someone really negatively. You say, you shouldn't say that. But it's true. You're like, well, technically you're right, but you should still not say that. Why not? You said speak the truth. You're like, it's challenging. Because for them, it's black and white. Now, as they get older, And especially as they begin to interact with different children. You know, when the first time you go to school and, you know, the people in your class don't know all the cultural references that you know. I still remember my son, you know, in Pashto, the word for water is obo. And my son, I remember we were at, I think, the doctor's office or something, and he kept asking for obo. And he was so confused that the doctor didn't get it. Because in his mind, of course you know what obo is. And it's, you know, theory of mind. The idea that other people have their own mind and their own perspective, and they might not know the references I'm making because they have their own reality. And at that time, he hadn't developed it yet. So he just assumed his knowledge of the world, everyone had the same knowledge. So he's asking the doctor for obo, and the doctor's like, calling me like, oh, well, what does he want? And I asked him, he's like, oh, he wants water. And he goes, yeah, yeah, water. And the doctor's like, why didn't you just say that? But in his mind, of course, you know what obo is. Like, anyone knows what obo is. Even I'm a kid, I know what obo is. But he doesn't get it that that's not how everybody sees the world. Y'all ever had those experiences where you went there and some other kid was allowed to do something that your parents told you is totally wrong, and you came home so confused, right? You're like, Matthew? Matthew gets to stay up till this late. You're like, and then parents drop the line. What's the line? If Matthew jumps off a bridge, you're gonna jump off a bridge? The classic line, right? And the kid's like, why would he jump off a bridge? And they go into the whole literally thinking about the situation. Why would Matthew jump off? You're like, that's not the point, right? Children, children. Does, does multiplicity is the second stage. You start to realize, wait, other people have their own ways of thinking about these topics. And so the child goes, okay, so in my house, this is right and this is wrong. But in Matthew's house, something else is right, something else is wrong. Okay, however that works, it all just kind of coexists. The child doesn't really know how to make sense of what's actually right, what's actually wrong. They just start to realize that there's a bunch of different opinions about what is right and wrong. And for the child, it actually becomes very challenging to really appreciate why there's different ways of thinking about it, because they haven't developed cognitively to the extent where they can start to critically dissect and go, oh, this is why they think that and this is why they think that. They don't know the reasons. They just know that there's a bunch of different ways to think about it. And if that's the case, then who do you listen to? Who do you listen to? Because this person will say, this is how it should be. And if I talk to this aunt, she says, this is how it should be. And when I speak to that uncle, he says, no, no, no. The rest of them are all wrong. This is how it should be. And this child's like, I don't know who's right. There's just a bunch of different opinions. They come to terms with that. Multiplicity. As the child grows older, the third stage is relativism. This is where now the child is able to critically think about ideas. So they start to think and go, well, from this person's perspective, this is the line of reasoning. Makes sense. But then from this person's perspective, this line of reasoning also seems to make sense. I guess the truth is just relative. Everybody has their own truth. It is just a matter of subjectivity, and that's all there is. And this would happen when? What age would you estimate this would be around? Anyone? Like, I don't have a definitive answer, by the way. I'm just trying to say from your experience, what would you estimate? Teens, right? Sometime in the teens. Could be earlier for some people. Typically, late teens, people start to really adopt this perspective. That's the third stage. But you can't go on like this forever. You can't continue to just accept that there's just a number of different opinions and somehow they're all valid. Even if you accept that, you start to realize at some level you have to make a choice. Okay, so I could do X or Y or Z. And each has their own kind of reasoning why it's right. I can't do all three because to do X would mean to not do Y, which would mean to not do Z. So which one do I do? Do you see that? Like you can't be neutral all the time. You realize you're kind of forced to pick. And that would be the fourth level, commitment. Commitment. The level where an individual realizes I have to choose some way of making sense of the world. And this, again, this is just intellectual development, but it plays out in so many different ways. A young child growing up, for example, will do often whatever their parents tell them, will wear the clothes their parents tell them to wear. And as they get older and they start interacting with friends who tell them, no, that doesn't look nice, they're like, oh, my parents said it looks nice. No, but it doesn't. Your parents are probably just old. So now the kid's like, maybe my friend's right. So they come home and start throwing a fit. I don't want to wear these clothes. Because now they've reached multiplicity. Prior to that, it was just my parents will tell me what to do. And now they're like, well, there's actually different opinions about this. Then you get to your teens. And what happens in your teens? You try to make everybody happy because everyone's right. So you're making your friends happy over here in their own way, making your parents happy over here in your own way. You're making, these relatives happy in this way. You're just trying to keep everybody happy. You're trying to be that people pleaser for everybody. But eventually you realize, I can't do that. It's just not possible. Everyone has their own opinion, sure. And maybe they even have their own reasoning, sure. But surely someone's right. And then people start to really try to commit to a way of being. This is who I'm going to be. And I know you're going to get upset about it, but I'm going to choose to live this way. And I know you're going to be upset too, but this is the way that I choose to commit to. Because you realize you can't go on trying to keep everybody happy and respecting all relative and subjective opinions equally. You do have to make a commitment to something. How many of y'all relate to this kind of process that Perry describes? Show of hands. You see what I'm talking about? And maybe you're trying to figure out where you are. But this is important. Understanding this process is very important because you can begin to make sense of where you are and why you might find people in certain aspects of their life are still very dualist in their thinking. Have you seen that? They can be quite committed and quite, open-minded, flexible about certain things, but you give them a certain topic and it just becomes dualist. It's black and white. For many of us, religion was like that. It's black and white. When you first start learning religion, it's black and white. And we're just convinced. As you learn more, you quickly realize, oh, it's not just black and white. And that's not a bad thing. There are different opinions. But then it becomes confusing. Because you're like, man, it's just a bunch of opinions. I don't know what to do in the face of all these opinions. But then you realize you can't just keep throwing your hands up in life. You have to commit to something. So you're like, okay, I need to figure this out. Let me learn. Let me seek knowledge to better try to understand what I should commit myself to. You can apply this to anything because it's about intellectual development. By a show of hands, how many of you would agree with this statement? That we live in a time where we are drowning in information. Information, just drowning. The amount of ideas that vie for our attention and our acceptance are incredible. Like there's so many. And that's why it becomes so much more important to be intentional about what you choose to internalize and what you choose to accept. You can't, one of the difficult realities for people who like to read is the realization that you'll never be able to read every book. How many of y'all realize that? Where it's like, shoot, I won't be able to read everything. So I guess I have to prioritize. And then prioritization becomes a challenge. The number of ideas that we are surrounded by in the society that we live in. In other parts of the world, well, now with the internet, we are inundated with theories and ideas. And think about that. The amount of opinions you come across. How many opinions could you come across in a minute? If you just scrolled TikTok and you just quickly watched a little video, read maybe 3, 4 comments, moved on. And that video was about religion. Next one, it's about cars. Next one about makeup. Next one about politics. Next one back to religion. And each one, you're getting ideas, and you're getting this comment sections, and you're reading the different comments. In 1 minute, is it unreasonable to say that you'd be exposed to at least 15 or 20 different opinions and ideas and viewpoints? That's 1 minute. And if you doom scroll for half an hour, how many opinions and viewpoints did you just consume? An incredible number. And so you have a bunch of ideas in front of you. SubhanAllah, how many of you have had this happen? You had to send someone a message, through whatever messaging app. You pulled out your phone, did something else totally, put your phone away, and went, wait, no, I'm supposed to send a message. How many of y'all have done this? It's crazy. And the things, you forget why you even opened your phone. Either because notifications come up. So an email comes in. Okay, let me check that email. Check the email. Wait, did I say that? Is that what time the flight is? Let me go on the internet. Go on the internet, check the flight times. Then someone sends you a reel. Click on the reel. Then you start scrolling. 20 minutes. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing. Wasting time. Close. Put away. Oh, I have to send that message. If you remember. That's if you remember. That's a big if. This is the world we live in. The amount. In previous times, people didn't live like this. I hope we realize how unique this is. And not necessarily in a good way. Because you can find any opinion. Should I believe in the unseen or not? You'll find a bunch of opinions online. That's if you just use like social media where the algorithm suggests things to you. But if you choose to actively go down a rabbit hole, hopefully not on Reddit, but you go down a rabbit hole online and you search a topic, and then you get 10 different YouTube videos about it, and they're saying opposite things. So I'll give you a parenting example. You can find an argument for every type of parenting style online. You want to be gentle parenting? You'll find, oh, mashallah. But you want to be someone who believes in timeouts? You'll find that. You want opinions about timeouts being abusive? Oh, you'll find that too. What do you even believe? How do you make sense of it all? So someone might say, but Shaykh, that's not a bad thing. It's actually good because, the more ideas you have, the more exposure you have, the more informed you can be, and the more you can make a more informed decision. If you only have one idea, then you're just stuck with that idea, or 2 ideas. You're just stuck with the 2 of them. But if you have 100 ideas, you can carefully select the right one. Do you know what the research shows? That's not the case. This is known as the paradox of choice. Barry Schwartz, famous for this research. What we like is, well, if I have more choices, I have greater freedom. I have more autonomy. I could choose what I want. I could have it tailored to exactly what I want. And this is seen in our society as a positive thing. But we all know too many choices can be overwhelming. Too many choices can be overwhelming. And so then it leads to decision paralysis, analysis paralysis. And then on top of it, this is the crazy one, it actually leads to diminished satisfaction. Why? Why would that be? More choices, so you get to choose exactly what you want, but it can lead to diminished satisfaction. How? You never know if you chose the right thing. Well, sometimes there is no right thing, but you never know if something else might have been better. So you get this pizza and you start eating, you're like, this is good. Then you check it, you're like, yo, but that could have been really good. Okay, next time. And next time, analysis paralysis again. Because next time, you're not even set on the restaurant. So you're like, which one should we do? What are we doing tonight? And sometimes 45 minutes goes by. 45 minutes go by. And you're just trying to figure out where to order from. And then what happens? Closing in 30 minutes. You're like, oh, quickly, we need to decide. SubhanAllah. We think that having more options should be easier, and that way we can get exactly what we want, and we'll be happier because we'll choose what we want. It leads to a lot of stress. How many of you, show of hands, actually really like it when someone else just decides? And so we become what? I'm good with anything. I'm good with anything. And everyone's good with anything. And then we're all looking at each other like, man, come on, like, what are we doing here? The paradox of choice. SubhanAllah. What happens when that becomes the case with information? Where there's so much information, I don't know what to believe. I don't know what the truth is. I don't even know what's worth reading and what's not worth reading. I don't even know how to analyze whether it's true or not. I just don't know. How many of y'all sometimes feel that way in the world that we live in? You're just like, I just don't know. And then, what's our reaction when we're in the face of all of that? What's usually our reaction? Anyone? Just give up. Isn't it convenient to just not engage then? You know what? Forget it. This is too complicated. So I'm just going to focus on fun stuff. Right? I'll just focus on fun stuff. Stuff that's not going to take up all my cognitive, resources. I could just do fun stuff. And then we amuse ourselves to death. That's what we do. We just have a good time, consume Netflix, consume shows, doom scroll. We're not even thinking too hard about the ideas. Occasionally we come across a video that really triggers us, and so then we end up in the comment section really fighting it out a little bit, and then we move on, right? But we don't really know, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating when you feel like you're not in control. Because you're not actively making decisions and choosing. You're just kind of going with whatever comes your way. And if someone, sometimes you hear people, they'll say, I really want to start understanding certain things about the world. But one of the challenges, where do I even start? You ever searched up like best books on parenting? And like 50 books pop up. Like, what do you even read? How do you know what to read? How do you even know how to sort it out? There's a really good work on this by a German-Korean philosopher. I've mentioned him before, Byung-Chul Han. I mentioned him on a work that he wrote called The Burnout Society. Ours is a society of burnout. And what's the reason for that? So he talks about it in that essay. The essay that I want to talk about today is called Infocracy, like democracy. He says it's like we're living in the time of information democracy, where now you're just going to have a bunch of ideas out there, and people don't have the means to sort through the ideas, so then people don't know how to even figure out the truth. And then he says that the concept of truth then is under threat. Because when things are too complicated to figure them out, you never get to that conclusive decision and like understanding, and you kind of just go, I don't know. But how do you live a life with I don't know? How do you raise kids with I don't know? How do you make decisions for yourself with I don't know? He says, past authoritarian regimes, what they would do to control the masses is restrict information and censor information. So, how many of you read Fahrenheit 451? Right? All about this idea of censorship. Don't give the public access to information that might cause them to rebel. He says today it's the opposite. Today we are flooded with information and we drown in that flood. And equally, we're helpless. And then to top that, now you have fake news, misinformation, you have AI with the deep fakes. We live in challenging times. And so it's hard to sometimes distinguish reality from facts. He says even the systems that we have in place to give us information, they don't actually foster true discourse, true communication and understanding. He says what they do foster is sensationalism. It's not about sharing meaningful content, it's about going viral. What goes viral? I mean, people do research on virality. Like, what causes something to go viral? Usually sensationalist. People rage bait with their videos, right? The amount that goes into trying to get people's attention. Even though, so it's not about the quality of your content being good enough to get you. It's we need to dupe you into, capturing your attention. And so he says social media, he said it's structured to maximize engagement. That's why now you have what? I have, I have a PDF to send you. Just comment environment and I'll send it to you. Why? And so then 200 people comment environment, engagement. It's not about, well, here's the link. Let's make it simple. Check my link tree. There's a link to the PDF. No, I want everybody to comment environment. So the engagement increases. Do you see the systems here? It's maximizing engagement. Now, if some of you work in like social media stuff, some of you are like, Sheikh, this is no, like you're killing my industry here. No, but I'm trying to talk about it in the context of what? Wisdom. Why wisdom would be so challenging. I hope we're starting to see why it would be so difficult. One of his quotes from his book, Infocracy, he writes, he says, sovereign is he who has control over the information on the internet. And that's why we're seeing censorship. With Palestine, this should be abundantly clear to us. The control of information, what information is promoted, what's not promoted, how willfully and intentionally certain things are reported and certain things are not reported. It's very clear to us. The power of it to sway public opinion. I mean, that's why. And so now, when there's so many opinions coming at people, what do people end up saying? I don't know enough to take a side. There's dead babies right there, like videos of dead babies, and I don't know enough to take a side. How much paralysis do you have to be in to see videos and pictures of dead babies and go, yeah, I don't really know what side to take here. I can't really comment. Allahu Akbar. This is the paralysis that Schwartz talks about. And this is a crisis of truth. And so then the question becomes, in such a world, how does one even begin to develop and acquire wisdom? How do you sift through the information? And even if you do gather information, there's no guarantee that it translates to wisdom. And so these are the challenges. The ability to sift through and decipher mass information will require tools. Tools, intellectual tools to be critical. Otherwise, what ends up happening is we become passive consumers of ideas. And that's kind of what's happened to many, if not most of us. We've adopted a secular lens of the world, despite being Muslim, and our default way of thinking about the world is through that secular lens. And as a result, we constantly run into friction with our religion. And let me explain that further. I do hope, inshallah, in coming Thrive series to explore and explain this idea of what the secular means in more detail, so that we can kind of better understand ourselves, inshallah. But we've come through an education system that's taught us explicitly or even implicitly what to value. And some of us can't really articulate why we believe what we believe. So what ends up happening? We have these lenses on, we're wearing these lenses, figuratively, and we come to this topic, and Islam has a certain stance on it. This is halal, this is haram, this is not allowed, this is allowed. We come to it with our lens, shaped over years and years of education, and living in a society that promotes certain values. So we come to these issues, and then we don't agree. And we go, I don't know why Islam would say that. This hadith? Oh, it's a tough hadith here. I'm not sure if I agree with this. And we're very critical. We're ready to reject. We're ready to ask questions. And so I've had many conversations with people who really struggle with certain verses of Quran, certain sayings of the Prophet ﷺ, certain rulings in Islam. And usually my question to them is really like, okay, so what do you believe? And their belief usually is the opposite. So Islam says it's halal, and they're like, why? It should not be halal. This should be immoral. So my question usually is, why should it be immoral? Why are you convinced it's immoral? And they'll say, well, because X, Y, Z. But how do you know that's true? I don't know. That's what it seems true. Like that's what should be. And people get really irritated. And this is back to Socrates' time, right? Socrates was known as the gadfly, because that's what he would do. People would say, like, this is just, this is unjust. And he would walk up to them and say, oh, you're saying this is just, that's unjust? What's justice? And they'd be like, okay, it's X, Y, Z. He'd say, but no, look at this instance. Your definition doesn't apply. So you're wrong. And they would say, okay, fine, you're right. Let me adapt my definition. It's this instead. And he'd keep poking holes. Eventually they'd be like, you know what, Socrates, we're done. I can't keep answering your questions. And I've had this experience many times where I keep asking questions. Well, how do you know that? Why are you so confident? What's the basis of your reasoning? I don't know. It feels right. But what if it feels right to you and not to me? Then who's right? I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I just think that's wrong. Okay, but you have to be able to articulate why you think. And that's part of the challenge, is we don't know how to think critically about our own perspectives, let alone the world. We're ready to go to the world, use our lens, and critique the world. But maybe we've never paused to say, wait, I need to critique the lens through which I'm looking at the world to begin with. But a lot of us, it's the idea of the fish don't notice the water around them. Just like we don't notice the air around us. It's just there until someone points it out and you're like, oh yeah, we're surrounded by air. That's true. I feel it. But we get so used to it that we totally lose sight of it. And so, David Foster Wallace, in his commencement speech, he talks about these two fish that are swimming, and they're younger fish, and they pass by this older fish. And the older fish looks at them and goes, how's the water, boys? And the younger fish go, yeah, it's good, it's good. And after they're out of, they're far enough away from him, they turn to each other and go, what water? What water? Meaning what? They didn't even realize that they're surrounded by water. It was just so normal to them. Sometimes the hardest things to see in life are the most obvious. And that for us is usually the lens that we look at the world through. We can't see it otherwise because we've never seen it otherwise. The Prophet ﷺ, he came to his society and he pushed them to think critically. Because the people were just doing whatever they were told. They said, our forefathers did this. This is what the people around us do. And so that's what we're going to do too. And that's how we feel, many of us feel. Well, everybody around me believes this is wrong, so it should be wrong. And then all of a sudden Islam comes and says it's okay. How's that okay? Before you ask how Islam says it's okay, how do you know it's wrong? What's the standard you're holding Islam to? Because that's essentially what you're doing. You're saying, here's the standard of morality. Islam doesn't meet the standard. Wait, what's the standard? Who determined the standard? The Prophet ﷺ challenged the status quo. He came to people and said, you need to think carefully about the decisions you're making. And they rejected him. People are not comfortable revisiting ideas and thinking critically because that's a lot of work. Isn't it much easier just to go on doing what you've always been doing? It's convenient. Because if you accept that certain things are wrong, now you got to change. Now you might have to do things that are not so convenient. Now you might have to give up some privilege. Who wants to give up privilege? And so the people of the time of the Prophet ﷺ were very resistant to critical thinking at all. No, Muhammad, and they just turned to ad hominem attacks. Oh, you're just a magician. You're a sorcerer. You're losing it. Or you just want dunya. And they attacked him. Why are you bringing all this up? We've never heard anybody talk about this. Everything was fine. And they accused him of being someone who divided people. Oh, the Prophet Muhammad, oh, he divides people. He ruins families with his ideas, and the same thing they said about Socrates before him. They said Socrates, he corrupts the youth. Why? Because he comes to them and he challenges them to think carefully about the ideas in their society. And because that challenges the status quo, they push back on him and said they put him to death. Socrates was put to death for this whole approach, which is known as Socratic questioning. The idea of someone making a claim and you question the claim, and they make another claim and you question that, and you dig deeper and deeper until you try to get to the core and the crux of the argument or perspective. Islamic scholars have always done this, by the way. The Socratic method of questioning. There's a hadith in Bukhari narrated by the great companion Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu anhu. He said, بَعَثَ النَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ سَرِيَّةً, that the Prophet ﷺ sent an army and a caravan of people who were going to fight. فَاسْتَعْمَلَ رَجُلًا مِنَ الْأَنصَارِ وَأَمَرَهُمْ أَنْ يُطِيعُوهُ. He took one of the men in the group and he made him the leader. And he told the rest of the people, obey this leader. He is your leader. Whatever he says, you must do. So along the journey, something happened and this man became really upset. The leader became really upset with his people. He said, hey, didn't the Prophet ﷺ tell you that you need to listen to me? They said, yeah. And he was so angry. He said, you know what? Gather some wood. They lit a fire. He said, okay, go in the fire. So some people were really confused. They were like, the Prophet did tell us to listen to this man. So maybe we should go in. And you had others who said, no, do not go in the fire. You're not allowed to do that. Because you're not allowed to kill yourself. So they stopped them. Eventually they all came back to the Prophet and they said, look, we believed in the Prophet ﷺ. Why? To be saved from the fire. Why are we going to enter this fire? How does that make any sense? And so eventually they saved them. They didn't let them go in the fire. And they all went back to the Prophet ﷺ. And he uttered this statement. He said, لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق أو في معصية الله. There is no obedience to anyone in creation if it entails disobedience to Allah. Think critically for yourself. If someone tells you to do something, that's haram. You cannot do it and say, well, I'm just going to tell Allah my mom said to do it. I'm going to tell Allah that my dad said to do it. I'm going to tell Allah that my friend said to do it. You can't do that. Allah gave us intellect for a reason to think critically and say, wait, I know this person is telling me to do it, and I know they're a very important person in my life, but I objectively believe this is wrong Islamically. I can't do this. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged this. So I want to finish here with a few, comments and remarks about a subject that today is, may Allah help us, is ridiculed. But I think there's great value to it if we understand what its objective was, and may not continue to be, but ideally if we understood it. I will, inshallah, connect this topic next session, inshallah, with the Quranic conception of wisdom. Because Allah in the Quran speaks about hikmah, wisdom, over and over and over again. He says one of the duties of the Prophet ﷺ was to teach people wisdom. وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. Teach them the book and teach them wisdom. So I'm going to explore that inshallah in the next session. But to end today, I want to talk about something known as the liberal arts. And I say it's ridiculed because today people will make fun of someone with a liberal arts degree and someone who goes to a liberal arts college. Like, really? Like, that's what you wanted to do? That's what you chose? And the reason why do you think it is that we kind of mock and ridicule people who pursue this? Number one, I think it's we don't understand what the liberal arts are, and I hope to explain that a little bit more. But what do you think the reason is? And here in Canada, we don't really have many liberal arts colleges, but we have the humanities. People choose to study the humanities, which is not the same exactly, but there is overlap. What do you think the reason is? Yeah. There's not a clear career pathway. Absolutely. What do you think is the assumption being made in that perspective? That you can't make money. Okay, but what else? There's a deeper assumption being made. No skills. Okay, deeper assumption. Can't make decisions. No, I think the assumption at its core is the purpose of education is money. That's the core assumption being made. And if some of us are thinking, what do you mean? What else? It goes to show how much our lens has been informed by this worldview. That is not the Islamic worldview. Knowledge is not for making money. Knowledge will help you develop skills that maybe in the world we will end up going and being able to make money. Sure, the purpose of knowledge and education is not to make money. That is what it is today, which will then really call into question what really is what we call education today. Is it still education? Yeah. Beautiful points. Beautiful points. It's very much in line with what I'm about to kind of explain here. The liberal arts, the term liberal already throws people off. They hear liberal, they're like, excuse me? No. The idea is liberty, freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from being enslaved by other people's ideas. Because if someone presents an idea to you in a really beautiful and carefully crafted manner, it can sometimes be really hard to identify what's wrong with this idea because it sounds so persuasive. It appeals to everything that you already believe. And so you just kind of follow it blindly. Maybe you follow it because it speaks to your pain. Do you see that? And I'll give you an example here to illustrate this. Imagine there's somebody, imagine there's somebody who has been wronged by someone else. And you go to the person who's been wronged and you begin to provide them really negative information about the oppressor. How likely is this wronged person to accept what you're saying? Extremely likely. Why? Not because what you're saying is necessarily true. Because what? They have strong negative emotions already, and those negative emotions want to believe these things because it confirms their bias. So the individual will be like, yes, and they'll take it as truth. How many of us are susceptible to that? We carry pains in our lives, and if someone speaks to our pain, we don't think critically. It's like, you're speaking to my pain, and if you get my pain, you must be right. Because my pain is real. So if what you're saying aligns with it, it must be true. That's flawed reasoning. That's known as emotional reasoning. And that's considered a cognitive error. It's a mistake. So the liberal arts, the goal always was freeing students from intellectual and ideological enslavement. You don't just accept every idea that comes to you. See, little kids do that. Little kids will accept ideas very easily. They're impressionable. They don't have the capacity cognitively to differentiate between different ideas. So anyone kind of shares an idea and it sounds, oh, okay, I guess if you're saying that authority, my teacher, it must be right. So-and-so saying it must be right. And if we don't develop the ability to critically think, we will continue to get older, and we will continue to just listen based on authority. This person has doctor before their name, must be right. This person looks like they're a religious person on TikTok, must be right. And that's a recipe for disaster. If we don't know how to think critically about the information we're consuming, we're going to be at the mercy of that information. Dorothy Sayers, in one of her essays called The Lost Tools of Learning, really recommend this. She says, by teaching people how to read, all of them how to read, we've left them at the mercy of the printed word. Meaning what? If you know how to read, but you don't know how to critically think about what you read, you will read it and take it as gospel. Must be true, because it's in a book. What if the book's wrong? What if the author is flawed in their reasoning? If you can't do that, just the mere fact that someone wrote an article somewhere would be enough to be an authority for you and you'd accept it. So we don't really know now what information is important and what's not. It's all just information out there. And to your point, we're focused nowadays more on what we're becoming and not who we're becoming. What kind of people we're becoming. It's incredible that we as a society can graduate with master's degrees and PhDs and still have very little understanding of why we behave the way we behave. And we don't have much ability to regulate our behaviors, our emotions. We don't know why we continue to hurt the people around us. We're not sure. It's like we've understood the world, but not ourselves. C.S. Lewis, he writes in The Abolition of Men, he says, we make men without chests, and we expect of them virtue and enterprise. Meaning what? We make people without substance. People don't develop virtue. They just learn skills. They learn how to code. They learn how to write a research paper. But then we criticize them when they act against virtue. Wait, why do you expect virtue from them? Where would they have developed it? Where along the way? In the institutions that produce academics, what type of behaviors take place on weekends and at nighttime? In dorm rooms, what goes on? In parties? Like, it's no secret. And these are considered who? People that next year will be considered academics. That give it 1 or 2 years, they'll be out there and they'll be treating someone in a clinic. These are the academics. What Lewis talks about is he says, look, a purely technical education, what it ends up doing is it creates morally and intellectually passive individuals. The individual does not know how to even think about morality, and they don't even know how to think about ideas, and they don't even know how to think about their own thinking. So they don't even know where to go with it. They don't know how to swim. And so in such a situation, what does one do? That's why the foundation of the liberal arts are 3 subjects: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. What grammar is supposed to teach you is, how does a sentence come together? How does a sentence come together? And what does it mean? How do you go from words to meanings? Because words are mere vehicles to meanings. How can we ever appreciate the Quran if we don't know how to derive deep meanings from words? How do we know? How will we learn wisdom if some of the most profound books today are so hard for us to understand because we don't know where the sentence starts and where it ends? Grammar. Grammar seems almost pointless to us. A lot of us will be like, I know how to read, because we read textbooks. We don't even read the original works. I mean, we are a society that looks for bird courses. Courses where you don't have to read. We are a society that thrives off cliff notes. This is the society that we inhabit. And so it becomes very challenging to pick up an original work and just read it. But grammar, the study of grammar, and traditionally it was taught, grammar manuals. You studied grammar, like step by step, to know how to put together a sentence. That's just the foundation of the words. Then you study logic to understand the meanings underlying the words. So, what's a general noun, a common noun versus a particular specific noun? What does it mean to predicate a word of a subject? What are the categories? These are all logical studies. And I speak about them using Western terms, but we have this in the Islamic tradition. Anyone who studies Islamic education starts with language, starts with grammar. The Quran, if you open tafsir, you always start in the Quranic explanation with grammatical analysis, always. And many scholars would also add logical analysis. But students study logic in the Islamic tradition, known as mantiq in Arabic. And this is, people say, well, that's a Greek thing. I mean, the Greeks it can go back to, but it can go back to the Greeks and Aristotle and Plato. But human intellectual reasoning is universal, regardless of who's the one that wrote it down. All of us do it. So logic is not something that's like divorced from the Islamic tradition. Imam al-Ghazali, he's written a book showing how in the Quran you have logical arguments. Logical arguments in the Quran. And so logic helps you now dissect what's happening, not just in the words, but in the meanings of the words. And finally, you have what's called rhetoric. Rhetoric teaches you what makes for persuasive language. And what you realize a lot of today, the words and the language that we see around us is often pure rhetoric with no substance. That's how you rile people up and their emotions. You don't have to actually provide any logical substance. Just say the right thing that will trigger people's emotions, get them riled up, and you're good to go. Even if the facts totally contradict it. But that's what ends up happening. If we're not going to be really thinking carefully, our emotions will take over. If the rider's not in control, the elephant reigns free. And so these were always considered the trivium. These were considered the foundation of any education. You started with these, and from using these three skills, these three tools, you then ventured into other subjects. And the idea was these three will equip you to be able to read people's works, logically think critically about them, and understand the language and what's actual substance, what's just flowery talk. Because rhetoric does impact people and their emotions. Absolutely. And if you study rhetoric, you realize that. Because there's a difference, right? And Shakespeare said that one of the greatest things he acquired was a liberal arts education. Shakespeare, for example, to be or not to be, that is the question. There's a unique rhetorical strength to that statement. It was not the same if someone says, should I kill myself or not? That's what I'm thinking about. It's not the same. To be or not to be, that is the question. The force of that line lies primarily in its rhetoric. One US politician, he said, ask not what your country can do for you, but rather ask what you can do for your country. And everyone's like, yo, bars. No, that's just what? That's just rhetoric. That's just rhetoric. Once you learn rhetoric, you start to understand how you can structure things in a way that will carry a certain effect. And the Prophet ﷺ and the Quran are pinnacles of rhetoric, of balagha, of eloquence. See, rhetoric can be used to manipulate, but it can also just be used to beautify, words, truthful words. And so these are the tools that we must learn if we want to be educated readers and consumers. Inshallah, in the next session, I hope to connect this with the Quran and the exploration of the word hikmah and the meaning of hikmah and wisdom in the Quran, inshallah. My goal today, and hopefully it'll make sense to you, my goal has been, number one, to highlight the challenges to wisdom in our society. And number two, to just leave you with something that you can start thinking about as means of developing tools to be more critical in your reading and consuming of information. Insha'Allah ta'ala. May Allah ta'ala grant us tawfiq to be people that seek wisdom. May He grant us the ability to become wise people. And may He grant us the true understanding of the purpose of education. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Jazakallah khair to everybody for coming out. I appreciate you guys coming. I know Thrive is a little bit like a coin toss, where you show up and you're like, we have no idea which direction this conversation will go. But I do think we should be well-rounded people, where our goal is not merely to hear, the word I was looking for last time was banal platitudes. The word is platitudes, banal platitudes, which means what? Phrases that we just keep repeating, but they don't really carry meaning. And I hope that we can develop into people that think carefully and reflect deeply about the human condition, about our own lives, and about the world around us, inshallah. That's part of the goal here, okay, inshallah? So we'll see you next time. Next week, we will not have Thrive. Next Monday, we won't have Thrive. There's a Quran competition taking place Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And so next week there will be no programming on the weekend, not Saturday, not Sunday, nor Monday. And then the following week, which is literally the week before Ramadan, we will have, inshallah, all 3 events, including Thrive. And then I'll take up the rest of the conversation on wisdom, inshallah. All right? If you're looking for someone to blame as to why we're not having Thrive next week, she's sitting right there, inshallah. You can take it up with her, inshallah. Okay? She's in charge for the Quran competition, so she's to blame. All right, Jazakumullah khair, guys. See you inshallah next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.